Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the Minister of Forest's response to my colleague last week, and frankly, it was like Groundhog Day. The Premier thinks British Columbians will accept his minister simply recycling the previous minister's talking points from 2017 on old growth. He's mistaken, Mr. Speaker. The Premier committed during the snap election to implement all of the old growth panel's recommendations, including the panel's call to immediately halt logging in the most endangered old growth forest ecosystems. As my colleague pointed out last week, we are now past the 6-month mark since government released the old growth panel, and we are coming up on a year since the government received that report. However, to date, we've seen almost zero action towards the Premier's promises. The only step taken so far, a set of deferrals announced in September, include very little of the grandest, high-productivity old growth stands at the heart of this debate. These are the monumental trees that tower high above you, the majestic forests that provide homes for so many species, including endangered species. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations. What immediate steps is she taking to fulfill the Premier's response and halt logging in our highest risk, high productivity old growth forests?
Minister of Forests, Land, Natural Resource Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And we want old growth forests to be appreciated by people today and in the years to come. It's also a priority for our government to support good jobs for people in BC's forestry sector. And that's why our government asked an independent panel to advise us on how we could do better when it comes to protecting our old forests. And our government is dedicated to implementing the 14 recommendations to ensure a new holistic approach on how we manage BC's old growth forests. And that's why, as a first step, just a first step, member, in September, we collaborated with Indigenous governments and protected old growth in 9 different areas across BC. And that was one of the recommendations that the panel put forward. The very first recommendation was to make sure that we are working with Indigenous nations across the province, and that's what we did. That's our first step. There is more action to come, and we will be doing this. We also brought in a special tree regulation, so 1,000 to 1,500 of those special trees the member referenced will be protected. So we are moving ahead to protect old growth forests in this province. We are moving away from the divisive actions of the past government to make sure that we are working together. We are working with Indigenous nations, we are working with communities, we are working with corporations, with labor, with environmental organizations, and communities who are dependent on the forest industry to ensure we can move forward in this province.
Member for Saanich North and Islands, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately, while the talking continues, the logging continues. And those trees, those monumental trees, are the ones that are being cut first, Mr. Speaker, because they are the ones that the forestry industry sees as the most valuable. They're the ones that they want access to. So while we talk in this place, we log. And those trees are the ones that are falling first. Mr. Speaker, this government is getting a failing grade from the lack of action so far on old growth, from both environmental groups that the minister talked about and conservationists. As experts have pointed out, the steps taken to date have been highly problematic, leaving out those monumental trees in at-risk valleys. And Mr. Speaker, the government has seriously exaggerated how much old growth forest they have actually protected. Scientists have run the numbers and have shown that this government has given interim protections to less than 1% of the remaining high productivity, big tree stands left in our province. So the clear cutting is continuing in critical old growth stands across British Columbia and right under our nose with the direct approval of this Premier and his minister. My question again is to the Minister of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations. When can we expect at least interim protections for these rare ancient forests? Or is the 1% all she's protecting?
Minister of Forests, Land and Natural Resource Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And well, the member, his numbers are inaccurate. So let's just clarify a few things. In this province, there are 95 million hectares of land. Of that, 57 million hectares is forested, 57 million hectares. Of that 57 million hectares, 13.7 million hectares is old growth forests. And of that, 10 million hectares is protected. That leaves 3.7 million hectares that may be harvested, Mr. Speaker. I didn't say harvested, may be harvested. Also, there is the special tree regulation. So if someone goes into a stand and sees a special tree, the very tree the member references, they are to protect that tree. And that includes over 1,000 to 1,500 trees in our province. We are committed to following the recommendations of the Old Growth report. And I want to thank the members. I want to thank Al Gorley and Gary Merkel for the work they did, the very thoughtful work they did as professional foresters, and Gary is a member of the Tahltan Nation. And we are moving forward to make sure that we have that government-to-government discussion with Indigenous nations. And that's one of the reasons we could defer those 9 areas with that critical old growth forest in it right off the bat, because there were those discussions with the Indigenous nations who were affected. So that is critically important to us. We are moving forward. We are making sure that we have the government-to-government discussions with the First Nations. We are looking at what other old growth forests we can defer. We're also working with the companies, with labor, with environmental groups, and those communities who are dependent on old growth forests in this province. It is not either or. It is making sure that we have a sustainable, well-managed forest industry while also protecting old growth forests.